We're so pleased he's making a return visit to our library. Dr. John McWhorter is Associate Professor of Linguistics at Columbia University, where he also teaches American Studies and Music History. He earned his BA from Rutgers, his MA from NYU, and his PhD in Linguistics from Stanford. He's the best-selling author of more than 20 books. He writes regularly for the New York Times opinion section, and he hosts the popular language podcast Lexicon Valley. Here to discuss his new book, Pronoun Trouble, The Story of Us in 7 Little Words, is Dr. John McWhorter.
Thank you, folks. Pronoun trouble. So what is the trouble? Well, there is some, and it's partly things that we're all very aware of, particularly with one pronoun today, but that is not what the book is only about. Pronouns are tough. Pronouns are the subject of all kinds of controversies, all kinds of, if I may, misimpressions, if you come to them from the perspective of a linguist. And I thought there needs to be a book that takes on issues with every pronoun in English. And so they comes at the end, but it starts with I, and it goes through you, he, she, it, and we, as well as they. And what you see when you look at pronouns in English is that the story of language is in all of those little words taken together. And there are all sorts of lessons that they have to teach us, including ones that are extremely unexpected. I'm going to give you the one that goes over the hardest first, because I discuss it in the book. I believe it's the first time the general public has been given what all linguists agree on about this. And I'm not sure whether it works, but it's a very interesting point, which is that if we start with I and me, the thing that you've been told that when somebody says Billy and me went to the store, it's wrong. It's wrong. The people who told you that were very well-intentioned. They were very well-informed. They knew the difference between a subject and an object. I know it seems like the most natural thing, but that is a complete myth. And part of the reason that you know is because why do so many people make that mistake? It's one thing if a certain kind of person is somehow under-equipped or slovenly or something, but so many people make it, including that there's no such thing as a child who doesn't start out saying that. Even the most articulate, confident, shiny of children say, Justin and me played ball, and then you have to tell them. How come no child doesn't do this, whereas they do everything else, including complicated things like the fact that you have to say, I am, you are, he is, we were. That's tough. Think about our verb to be. It's a nightmare for people who come to the language as a second language. Yet every kid, Billy and me, Billy and him, that's not the full explanation, but really, if you look at it from a faraway perspective, you can see that the idea that that's wrong simply doesn't cohere. And I know that this sounds peculiar, and I'm not going to give you the whole argument here, but it's actually a rather fascinating one. And the truth is, if you take Old English and Middle English and Modern English, and you look at how pronouns work and whether people are saying the equivalent of Billy and him went to the store, it never happens in Old English, ever. It doesn't happen in Middle English at any phase. It's something that starts creeping into casual text starting in the 1600s and then really in the 1700s. Now, what happened then? Why is it that especially as education was becoming more widespread, when everybody is getting what you might think of as more sophisticated than most people speaking Old English, who were almost all illiterate, had no connection with education, school didn't really exist. How come they never get it wrong, and then all of a sudden, by Jane Austen, you start having grammarians complaining about it? And the reason is certainly not that everybody got messy sometime around 1690, yet we're looking for a reason that this would happen. And the truth is, this is the simple truth. The reason we're told that I is subject and me is object is because that's the way it works in Latin and Greek. And there was a time when what passed for grammarians were these people who knew a few languages and had certain opinions about which languages are better than others. And to them, Latin, because of associations with classical Latin and the empire that it was part of, their idea is that Latin is the best language, that some other language, like one mostly spoken as English was until the 1600s, it should be like Latin. It should model itself on that ancient language. Now, Latin happens to be the kind of language where you do have I as a subject and me as an object, and nobody messes it up. Spanish happens to be that kind of language. Nobody would ever mix up yo and me in Spanish. No one has to be told, which leads to another question. If nobody messes it up in Spanish, say in Spain and everywhere in Latin America, why is it that we're wrong in saying Billy and me went to the store? What is it about Anglophones in particular? Clearly, there must be some other answer. And the truth is, the people who decided that we had to keep our I and our me arranged the way Latin did were well-intentioned, but I think we know today that Latin is not the best language in the world. Neither is English. No language is the best language in the world. And English should be allowed to just be like English, or like French, where for those of you who know French, if you think about it, Billy and me went to the store is the only way to say it. You couldn't say Billy et je went to the store. Notice it's impossible? You know that after 1 year of French. Nobody in France complains about this. It's just the way it is. And yet in English, you keep on bopping these poor little kids on the back of the head. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the weeds on this, but really the answer to this, what happens is, some languages have more endings and stuff than others. And so, any of you who have taken Spanish know that Spanish has a whole lot more conjugational endings, etc., than, for example, English. French is like English in that way. If you get away from the writing system, the ends are really chopped off. And so I speak, you speak, he speaks. Je parle, tu parles, il parle. It has nothing to do with that stray S. You really get blunted to that sort of thing in French. When a language happens to lose most of its endings, which is what happened from Old English to English, you lose your sensitivity to subject and object as the way you organize your pronouns. There are other ways of organizing pronouns. If you look around the world, languages are fascinating in how they decide when they use which form of the pronoun. The subject-object thing, that, to me, that feels like steak and potatoes, but that's only because I'm speaking a Western European language. That's not the way it always has to go. And if you are a language that loses the endings, that subject-object sensitivity tends to wear away. And so, in German, which is just full of everything, you will not say, Wilhelm und mich went to the store. Nobody wants to say it, no little child says it, because it's got all those endings. Scandinavian languages like Danish and Swedish and Norwegian have many fewer endings than German. They're almost like us. And wouldn't you know, if you talk to a Scandinavian, you talk to a Dane, and you say, do people say, Bjorn and me went to the store? And the first response is, oh, well, they shouldn't. And then you say, right, but do they? And then the person will say, yeah. That's because Danish doesn't have endings in the same way as English. English is the most naked of the Germanic languages, and so me and Billy went to the store feels right. You can go around the world and see that. So the I chapter is partly just the story of this hoax that has been put forth as indicating whether someone's intelligent. You know what? The rule is this. English has a really cool rule about pronouns. There are languages in the world that do this. I'm so glad we're one of them. But it's not subject and object. The first person singular pronoun in English is me. Subject or object. It's not that I is the subject and me is the object, but it's me. Which is why, who broke that lamp? Me. You would never say me broke it. That's true. We'll get to that. But still, you don't say I. You have to say me. Or ding dong, who's there? It is I. No, it is me, even though it's not an object. You can go down the line with those. That's why little Billy says Billy and me went to the store. He's listening to the way we use the language. I is this special form, very commonly used, but special form of the pronoun that's used basically when it's right up against the verb. So, I went, but Billy and I went. Okay, but notice, no I and Billy. even though it's the subject. You would never say I and Billy. The reason that sounds like a Martian is because the I is no longer right up next to the verb. If it's anything but right up next to the verb with maybe a little adverb in there like actually, then the pronoun is me. That's it. But we're never told that because even the hippest grammar books we have will tell you that there's this rule that's really just a kind of vestige of Latin envy. So, of course, we have to learn to say Billy and I went to the store. I would not stand up here and make that mistake. I've learned, just like I have learned to use deodorant and to not drop food on the floor. You learn it because, what hill are you going to die on? But the truth is, when I hear my children saying him and me went, I would never tell them that's not proper grammar. I will tell them as time goes by, you are arbitrarily expected in certain circles to put it in a different way. Because that's just the truth. So that's the I story. That's enough of I. Then there's you. You is a whole different thing. We don't know, we're fish that don't know that we're wet. With you, we think it's perfectly ordinary to talk about one person and say, you go, clean up that lamp. Or you, and you mean 2 or 3 people, you go get out the vote, or something like that. That feels so natural. It's awkward sometimes, you have to get specific, but there's you and there's you. That is not the way a normal language works. And if you think about any other language the idea that there's you and you, it's frankly kind of deficient, really. And English used to be quite normal. We were a wonderful language with second person. There was singular, thou, and it had an object form, thee, and then you had you, but you was just the object form. Notice I'm putting it below on this hypothetical chart. Ye was the subject. So here ye is ye here. So thou and ye were the you words. If you asked some Thane speaking early Middle English, what are your words for you? As if that would make any sense. But what they would say is thou and ye. And then in the object, which they wouldn't be thinking of, it would be thee and you. And then there was also, we had a dual form. We had forms that meant you too. And so, thou, one person, ye, several people, yeet was 2 people. Believe it or not, that was the word, and it didn't mean to throw or something. It was just yeet. And you know what the object form of that was? Ink. Wouldn't it be fun if we had something like ink? And so it was thou, thee, and then yeet, ink, and then ye, you. That's the way a language should be. That's normal. And then as time went by, people started using this plural you in the place of the thou and the thee. And they started doing that so much that by the 1700s, except with Quakers, really, you were using you for everybody. And that happened. And here we are today. Thou is still used in rural parts of England and surrounding locations. There's no reason why a thou has to disappear. And if French has a tu, and Spanish has a tu, and German has a du, and Russian has a thu, why don't we have a thou? And it's funny, scholars can be odd, and I'm one of them, but I don't see myself that way because I can't see outside of myself, but it is mysterious, the lack of interest among the people who know more about this than anyone in the world as to why that happened in English. 1, why did everything just break apart? And then 2, why did it go in the wrong direction? And so especially if you've been learning European languages during the second half of the 20th century on, one thing you learn is, well, in French, there's du and there's vous, and that's singular and plural. You use vous in for formality to one person, but you always learn less and less in these egalitarian times are people using vous and the tu is taking over. That's happening all over Europe in every language spoken there that I can think of. Always it's the informal one that's taking over. But somehow in English it was the formal one that did. And so you just goes to everything else. That's a peculiar thing, and there's no real explanation that would really single out something about southern England where that would happen. And you have these whole books. There are books that are like the size of children that are talking about the gradual disappearance of thou and who and how women started using it less in their letters than men. I mean, you can really get very granular. But they never discuss why did that happen in southern England. It's kind of like If you read a newspaper story that said, a fire broke out at the Brooklyn Aquarium yesterday. When the firefighters got to the aquarium, the walrus told them where the fire had broken out. They got to the site of the fire and extinguished it in time for the next feeding of the seals, and very little equipment was destroyed. In other news, and you're sitting there thinking, but wait, how did the walrus talk? But somehow nobody found that interesting. That is the disappearance of you, and people nobody cares about the reason. I guess they're bigger fish to fry, but it is a very interesting story, and I give a stupid speculation or two in the book as to what happened with you, but really, it is a great, fascinating mystery, and it's fun reading the letters of women and men where the woman calls her husband you, and the husband is calling her thou. Not that that's fun, but I mean that it's a very different society, and then gradually it's just gone. A judge is yelling at a baker, and you can tell that the judge is like up high physically and the baker is down below. And he's yelling at the baker, and at first he starts out with you, but then as he gets really nasty, he starts using thou, 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 and thou better now, thou, thou, thou. You can see that it had a feeling. In Shakespeare, you can feel the difference between the thous and these and the ye's and the you's. We don't have it, and so I try to tell that story because it really has made English coarse in a way. And we try to fix it. That's what y'all is. You, y'all, what happened to y'all? Well, you don't want y'all because it's slang. But all that is that we're trying to fix it. English is broken, and nobody wants to fix it. So yous is ignorant, yins is Pittsburgh, y'all is suspect. You can use it informally, but you kind of keep it away from public view. So that's the you story. Then, one of the dullest pronouns is he. There's barely anything to say about that. But if you bring he together with he, she, and it, it's interesting looking at the beginning of English and now. It used to be that those pronouns were, from your perspective, he, that was he. There was no she, nothing like it. Hea was the feminine pronoun. And then hit, not it, but hit. But they were cute. They were like these three penguins. I don't know why they're penguins, but three of something. And so he, and then hea, and hit. And then they evolved, and he is just kind of a dud. But with she, one of the hardest things with Old English is figuring out what this little hea means. If you're not warned, you don't know that that's the word for she. But as time goes by, words erode. And so he, hea, after a while, hea is just hey. And so there were many dialects for a hot minute in England, and especially in the early middle, where there was only one gender-neutral pronoun already, way back then before Chaucer, where he and hey just fell together into one hey. People worked against it subconsciously, and she happened because there used to be a word that meant that one referring to feminine things. And so there was a that one for male things, that one for neuter things, that one for feminine things. So the feminine that one was dragged in. That word had been sea, and that became, as the sounds changed, she. But it's interesting seeing she creep in where it used to be had. And then with hit, you think, well, who in the world would ever have said hit rather than it? But it still pops up in, for example, old Southern literature. If any of you have suffered through Faulkner, and you're reading that text, he has things like, I won't suffer for you to do it. And that's because that's the way people actually spoke in the Old South. Zora Neale Hurston, in her extremely closely transcribed folk and now ancient black dialect, has people saying hit. It can throw you. Often people say that Zora's prose is kind of tough on the eyes. You have to get used to it. Some of it is just hit, when what she's expressing is the it that people in that setting would have used. So there's that chapter. That chapter has a cute, I'm not pushing the book, by the way. I've long stopped thinking about it. But if you do want to read it, that chapter has a cute title. And it's S and then H-E and then I-T happens. And so it's like, see, that's good. You have to, and I'm not great at those titles, but. So he is a dud, but she and it, they're very interesting stories. And then there is we. And when I first told linguist people that I was doing a pronoun book, and they say, you mean all about they? I said, no, nobody wants to read a whole book about that. I'm going to do all the pronouns. A couple of them said, what are you going to do with we? And that was true. It was a delicious challenge, but we is not a dud. For one thing, there used to also be wheat. Wheat meant we too. So it used to be I, we, and wheat. And so you could use it in that way. But also, we, because we're a broken language in some ways, does work that it's not always obvious that it's doing. And so, for French, you have the tu and the vous, politeness. For Spanish, you have tú and usted for the politeness. Any European language worth its salt has that. If you step away from English, then you have the respect, the politeness terms. Well, we don't have thou and you anymore. It used to be that for a while, thou was the familiar or sometimes disrespectful word. You was the way that you indicated respect for one person. That's the way English could have stayed. It's odd that that just wore away and stayed in the other languages. But we have other ways of being gentle. A lot of language is about not getting into people's faces. And so, we don't think about it, but imagine the waiter who says, so what were you thinking of having? But you still are thinking about it. So why were? Putting it in the past is a way of avoiding being too terribly direct. Or the person who says, I'm going to go ahead and take down your phone number. Go ahead. Which implies that you gave this go ahead when you didn't. It's a way of making the situation less abrupt than, I'm going to take your name. That's harder. I'm going to go ahead and take your name. It implies that you have given this liberty. We do that in so many ways. My favorite is the term head out. And you might think heading out is slang, but how do you leave? I mean, frankly, I often prefer to just not say anything because you can't walk up to someone and say, I'm leaving now. Thank you. It's too abrupt. I'm going to leave the room. Thank you for the party. You can't say that because it seems like you're angry. So that's the reason why people under a certain age say, I'm going to head out. I'm going to head out. That's the way to leave without being too direct. That's the equipment. We does a lot of that. And so, let's take our pill, says someone. But they're not going to take the pill themselves. But they're saying that because it's a way of not saying, you take your damn pill. So let's take our pill. Or, pretentious moment. I'm going to make myself sound more literary than I am. James Joyce, I love just saying it. Dubliners, which I did happen to read last summer. One of the stories, talk about literary, I don't remember the name now, but one of the short stories ends with these two petty criminals, and one of them has a token of some kind in his hand. And the other guy says, give us a look. And it ends there. Good story. But what us? Because the person who has the thing in his hand, he has already seen it. But when the other guy says, give us a look, that would be him in an old Warner Brothers movie or something. Give us a look. What he means is he's trying to convey respect to this bigger kind of butchy, toughy man, and because he's kind of the subsidiary character. So he says, give us a look. That's what we does. All sorts of things that we do with we seem very ordinary, but really they give us the politeness, the terms of distance that other languages often do more explicitly with a pronoun that does it or with a set of endings that do it. Japanese and Korean go crazy with this sort of thing, the honorifics. It's the beauty of those languages. We've got we. So there's more to we than just that it's two I's, which it technically isn't. And so we does a job. So then, after all those, well, then we get to they. So we live in a time when they is undergoing quite a bit of discussion because it's being used in a new way, surprisingly abruptly, and it occasions a lot of resistance. And so, Donald Trump cares about you, Kamala Harris cares about they, them, that sort of thing. That pronoun has been through so much trouble in its time. It's like that kid in 5th grade who everybody started picking on for no reason. They is that pronoun, always under fire. And of course, all of us, or most of us, some of us are quite young, but most of us grew up with the idea that already they was on the hot seat because you're not supposed to use it in the singular. So you were told, I was told, you can't say, tell each student that they can hand in their paper when they want to, because they is plural, you're told. They is plural, as if this is like protons and neutrons, but they is plural, so you can't use it there. Now, the truth is, most of us, I can't speak for all of us, but I can speak for me, most of us continue to use they in the singular in real life and just learned how not to do it on paper and such. And so, the reason that we did it that way was because, frankly, all of the quote-unquote best authors have been using singular they forever. I mean, the number of examples is almost embarrassing. Like Vanity Fair, Thackeray, a person can't help their birth, he writes. Now, is that really so wrong? Now, he could have written, a person can't help his birth, but I think he was going for a more general statement than that. He could have written, a person can't help her birth. And the truth is, it's surprising how arbitrary the origins of some of these poxes are. And so nobody was complaining about singular they until, to my knowledge, 1745, when one grammarian said that you have to use he because he obviously refers to both men and women, but you can't use they because they is singular. That's what this person said, and the book got around. Believe it or not, that was a woman. That grammarian was not a man, but Anne Fisher put that out in 1745. Then Lindley Murray picks it up in 1780, I forget, and that is the most popular grammar until Strunk and White. People would not say, read your Strunk and White, they'd say, read your Murray. And Murray picks it up from Anne Fisher, and it spreads across the world. But not too long ago, the tide started breaking on singular they. And that was because even as early as the aughts of this millennium, there was beginning to be a sense that you didn't want to use the gender binary as explicitly as before. And this is before trans issues came into the mainstream. But there was a sense that to use just he is rude, to use just she is, frankly, it's awkward, and how long are you going to do that? I mean, is there some kind of solution? He, she is something that you write. Saying he or she all the time sounds silly. To say she or he, all of it is just impossible. You needed something. And it was they. And so people started using singular they more. I'm getting old enough that things were different when I started writing than they are now. And I started 25 years ago, and I remember my singular theys always being expunged from what I wrote. About 7 years ago, I started saying, you know what? I have paid my dues. I know this language, and I want my singular they. And they started saying yes, and that was partly because there was just this new change in the tide. But the most important thing to realize is that if there's going to be a gender-neutral pronoun, we can't make one up. They is the only plausible solution. You want to make a pronoun up. I wouldn't mind making a pronoun up, coming up with some, pretty little thing that probably has some personal meaning that only I know, and watching other people use it, and maybe taking it from my favorite movie. That would be great, and there are small groups that have created things like Z, etc. And all power to them, but those are never going to catch on with the general population. It would be nice if they could, but they won't. So where are we? And people have been trying to do that for a long time. In the 70s, I remember as a kid looking in one of my mother's magazines. It was probably, what was it called? Sphere magazine. It had recipes, it was women's lib, and it was talking about how we need hesh as a pronoun. Get it? He and she. That probably didn't get any further than that magazine. And it's just, it just can't. And so what are we going to use? Are we going to use I, you, he, she, it, or we? No. And so there's only they. So now here we are in our times, and there is a new idea that a person might not want to be referred to as he or she. And so we're talking about a specific person, not this hypothetical person like the student who's handing in their paper, but Roberta is in the hospital and they want to get a haircut. That's the new one. And so Roberta is a they. And that's newish. About 10 minutes ago it was new. And it is a challenge because it's hard to use it that way if you're over a certain age, and in this case that age is 30. It can be confusing to hear unless you are a rather superhuman person sometimes. It's a challenge. And yet, the problem is that there's no other thing to use. And so, some remarks about they, some of which are not in the book because I wrote the book a couple years ago. Context can do a lot. They, the new they as I call it, that takes practice, but context does much more than we often think. And one way we know that we can handle it is think about how people felt when thou was disappearing and being taken over by you, and they were used to single people being referred to as thou. And there are a couple of sources of people who were really ticked off. They found it improper, they found it confusing. They're dead, and we're here. Time passes, and people get used to things. And in the case of Roberta wants to get their hair cut, you can get used to it, you know, and it's harder the older you get. This is all hit when I was in my 50s, and I've been thinking, wow, this is tough because, and this is what's so tough about it, it wasn't hard to get used to words like fax. That was fun. There's a new word for something that you use that breaks a lot, basically. But when it comes to pronouns, pronouns aren't words, they're little things. It's like screws rather than the board that is being screwed through. They're the little traffic cops. We use them thousands of times every day. We use them subconsciously. You don't teach a pronoun. You don't say, little Billy, you use we to mean two people. He learns it through context. And so changing a pronoun, that is a really, really tough thing, changing your use of pronouns. Now, it's partly age. I can't do the cute thing of pointing them out because they're over there, but my daughters who are 10 and 13, they use they as fluently as I use I and you. It came when they were little and they had no trouble. And I figure if they can do that with their plastic little brains, it means that ours can at least fake it, and that as society moves on, everybody will just be used to it because you're raised with it. And so my sense with they has been that it's here to stay, and because I'm a linguist and my specialty is actually how language changes, I thought, this is fun. You know, we have this new use of the pronoun within my lifetime, and it happens in 10 minutes, and so there's no question about it. I kind of enjoyed it. And I had some suggestions, though, because the confusion can be legitimate. I have read a couple of New Yorker pieces where I really was thrown by what the they meant, and not because I wanted to be, but because even with that splendid editing, there was no way of making it smooth. And I thought one suggestion, I put this forth in one of my columns not too long ago, is that at least in writing, maybe the new they should be a capital they, should be capitalized. And so, you know, Roberta wants their haircut, and make that a capital T. It wouldn't work to distinguish at the beginning of a sentence, but life isn't perfect. But if it could be that way anywhere after the beginning, it would make reading the theys smoother, because you would know that the capital T they was just one person. So I just hope that would catch on. Doesn't seem to be, but I would advise that. And if I were writing a novel, which I never will, that is how I would handle the they. But you know, the truth is, and I'm feeling more this way every few months. I wouldn't have said this in public a year ago, but it's beginning to be almost clear. I could be wrong. When I wrote Pronoun Trouble on a sun porch in the summer of 2023, I thought that the new they was here to stay. Now, in the late summer of 2025, my sense is that the new they may have hit a peak around 2019 through 2021, and that now it's falling away. And I'm only saying this on the basis not of study. I'm not sure if it's been studied yet. Somebody must be on it at this point. But I'm just going from my sense as somebody, you know, walking around in the world and who teaches at university and, you know, has various reasons to be around young people, such as the friends of my young people, etc. What I recall is that in 2020, 2021, kids wanting to be called they, it was legion. It was everywhere. And I thought, well, why would this ever stop? Many fewer, in my experience, are doing so now. My students who were really politely insisting on they in 2021 now don't, or they say you can use either one, but I never hear them using they, and never hear anybody addressing them as they. And so it may be, although to me it would be fun if it stuck. If anybody is really irritated by it, I think it may be that it was a trend. I'm beginning to feel that way, but I can't I can't know yet. So it might be that. It might be just one more thing in the history of they that's interesting, and then something else will happen. But you never know what will happen. And so I'm telling you that you can't make up a pronoun, and you can't. But you never know what the language will do. I should stop talking, so I'm going to just close with this little tidbit. In Baltimore, in black young Baltimore, there has arisen a gender-neutral pronoun, and that pronoun is a gender-neutral pronoun for third-person plural, and it's yo, not you, yo. And so yo is handing out papers over there, and then you don't know the gender of the person. Nobody knows exactly how it happened. You can kind of do an analysis. Of course, none of them were thinking about it. Nobody decided to do this, but it has crept in that you can refer to somebody as they, or you can refer to somebody as yo. Yo just sat down, not you, but that person over there who could be either a boy or a girl or whatever is just yo. And so that can happen, but it has to be spontaneous. And what's going to happen in standard English? Who knows? But they is interesting. Pronouns are interesting. And that's why I wrote the little purple book. And I hope that these things that I said about them were at least modestly diverting. And thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. So we're going to take some questions now. Just raise your hand if you have a question. And I want to encourage those who are on Zoom, you can type your question into the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can.
Hi, John. What do you consider the most beautiful language?
What do I consider the most beautiful language? Arbitrarily, Italian, standard Italian, because of the rather simple and open, for the most part, vowel system. And I would say that even if I had never heard an opera. I think Italian is very pretty to listen to. I think English is hideous, but I'm stuck with it. Why do you ask? No, Italian is very, Romanian is also very pretty. Oh, well. But Italian is what I would first think of. You too? Oh, Italian, okay. Yeah.
Another question here.
Is it your sense that shifts in language are taking place quicker now over shorter periods of time than they were, say, in Middle English?
No, I know what you're going for. In Middle English, change happened faster because almost nobody read or went to school, which means the language can just do what it wants, like popping up with yo as a new pronoun among kids who are just out in the street. Middle English changed faster. Everything gets slower once there's widespread literacy. Slang these days is churning faster than it did 20 years ago because of the internet. But what I'm doing right now is not changing nearly as quickly as it would have been in, say, 1380.
Yeah.
Thank you, first of all, for coming. It's a delight to hear
Pleasure.
you. What do you think is the toughest thing about learning English as a second language?
I know what it is, and it's not something that people talk about, but if you know somebody whose English is fantabulous, they learned it as a second language and they've got it down. They've got the idioms, they've got everything, they can talk fast. The one thing that I've almost never known any speaker like that to fully get if they learn the language after about 18 is how we use the future. The English future is so subtle, and so we think, I break, why something so negative? I walk, he walked, you will walk, and that's the future. But if you think about it, that's not really a sentence. And so let's talk about building a house. I will build a house. Like, we know what that means, but why would I ever put it that way? I would say, I'm going to build a house. And I wouldn't say, I'm going to build a house. That's a different thing. I'm going to build a house. Or, tomorrow, I build a house. There's resolve. Or, I'm going to buy you some socks. And there's a bit of threat in it. You just have to speak the language to know. But I will build a house is something that I would only say frankly, if I had not learned the language in the cradle, or if I was explaining that I was going to do something after having denied that I was going to do it for a long time. You know what? I will build a house. That's what that would mean. That is nasty. And so even somebody who's speaking English with barely an accent will often say, I will go to the bathroom now. And I'm always thinking that I'm going to go to, but it's just very, very hard.
I'm just going to point out we have a couple of our ESOL volunteer tutors there in the front row, and we really appreciate all of their hard work.
You ever remember that?
We have another question back here.
Oh, yes. On gender-neutral pronouns, I grew up where I was supposed to write his / her or he, and I didn't like either choice. So sometimes I wrote she throughout the whole paper, and that was very jarring to people. And is he / her still acceptable? Like a physician should respect his, her patients?
It's acceptable, but
Thank you.
you know, it's okay for writing, but it's harder to say it, and then you say his or her, and then the question is which one comes first and why. And so there's just, I remember that if I may, that reminds me of when I'm like 9 and 10. But I think we always felt that something was wrong. I would prefer the theyness, but that's just me.
Another hand.
I don't need the mic. Oh, okay. I was wondering, why wasn't it considered anybody to spell they when used singular THAY to distinguish? And when you said that people are more comfortable picking a gender, I'm wondering if you said people are not using the they as singular, and I'm thinking maybe people are becoming more comfortable picking a gender as trans has become more acceptable. But there's one person who still uses they, who's all over the New York Times, and that's M. Gesson, who went from Masha to M recently. And so I just think trying it THAY, then everybody knows what it is, and it's not jarring to us older people.
I would go with it, except there are some of the, quote unquote older people who would say that it looks like a misspelling. I would frankly think, well, let's get over it, but just let's have something that is clear. And yes, I would imagine that part of the reason things are changing with they is because there are some people who really do not identify with the binary at all. And Gesson, I know her some. Listen to me saying she, because I've known her a long time. But they really don't want that. But that's one category of person, and maybe with other people who feel like they're more one than the other, they're going back to the way they would have in 2015. Yes, and someone's going to do a good paper on this, I know, but it's not going to be me.
We have another question here.
Shout out to Romanian.
It's a great one.
I was going to say a little aside that the words in Romanian for you is tu or dumneavoastră. Luckily, my family was very casual. We used tu. But my question is about the word one. Like one can't help one's could that have been something that you wrote about as well?
Actually, one is part of our story too, because in English we use you for that too. And so you have to speak Dutch here instead of one must speak Dutch here. And so that stretches you out so far that usage of one crept in as clarity, but it's still very formal. You're not going to say that. For some reason, I was just thinking you wouldn't say it in a phone booth. How old am I? But you wouldn't say it. You wouldn't say it at the KFC. And so, but yeah, it's a funny thing because if English were normal, we would use the word man there. And so you have to speak Dutch there. One has to speak Dutch there. But our word man shortened to m and then just fell away like autumn leaves. It's the English story.
Here we go. A question back here.
Professor McWhorter, why has English evolved where when you talk about a supreme being, they always say he? Why isn't it gender neutral or, I dare say, a supreme being? Or why is it evolved to, is it just because of the bias, male bias?
This is like the coyote who, I have never thought about that. To be honest, at least in my circles, which are kind of limited, I would think we're moving away from that assumption that the supreme being would necessarily be a man. I know what you mean, I grew up with it, but I think it's considered a mark of sophistication to just casually say that that being is a she. I have never heard of that being referred to as they, but I wouldn't put it past, particularly that some parts of the Unitarian Church, I'm sure, are doing that right now. But I think, sorry if anybody here, but no, I don't. Like, if I were going to talk about God, I would not think of God as a he myself. I would, if deep down I do, I wouldn't want to admit it. So I just feel like it's changed. That's my guess.
Okay, I'm going to check upstairs. I think we have some question on Zoom.
Yes, we do. Relatives, the man who, the flower that, or which. Are there relative pronouns police?
There are. And those, it's not that I don't like rules. I'm actually a very uptight person. But that stuff with that and which is just something somebody made up. And we know who made it up, actually. That's a Strunk and White story. And White is E.B. White, who wrote Charlotte's Web and Stuart Little, and then the one that isn't as good, the Trumpet of the Swan, and also wrote for The New Yorker. But that is something that really got around because of Strunk, who, God love him, was just some professor of English from, I believe, Pittsburgh, who apparently had a way in the classroom, and that's what he liked. And so here we are. There are people who police it in that I could not get away without using that rule in anywhere that I write for. I know it's still taught in school, but just frankly, if you look at earlier texts, that's not something anyone did until they were told. And I know of what I speak at this particular moment because I just read one of Rick Atkinson's wonderful volumes on the Revolutionary War. I mean, he makes you feel like you're there. And he has lots of excerpts of letters that people wrote back then, and you can see how the language has changed since then. And one thing, I'm not kidding, one thing I've noticed over the couple months I've been reading those two books is that none of those people, even the most educated, even George Washington himself, have any sense of that and which in the way that we've been taught. So it's just one of those things, you've got to use your deodorant. But there are police, but I wish they'd retire.
I think we have a couple more up there.
Yes. Is shall a dead duck?
Is what?
Shall. S-H-A-L-L.
Oh, shall.
Yes.
Oh, God. All right. That's another one. The rules for how you're supposed to use shall, which to be honest, I now don't remember. I used to know. It's a very elegant web of creation, but according to my linguist friend Jeff Pullum, who is older, smarter, and knows more about English grammar than me, there's no evidence that anybody ever used shall that way. It's just that people were told to use it that way. And you can get used to it, you know, kind of like you can get used to the dial telephone when it existed. But that is another one where I have to say that that's something, I don't know who made the shall up, but I'm almost sure it's somebody who was in a periwig who died of yellow fever the next day. It was like somebody in 1770 without enough to do. So that shall.
I think we have one more up there.
This is a comment. Thank you for a lecture that makes an English teacher so happy.
Wasn't expecting that.
Hello. Okay, well, and thank you also. My question is kind of controversial, but I would love to hear your opinions on the political aspects of the they, them, which seems to be coming more and more in the forefront here.
Mm-hmm. I'm told that it's wrong for me to espouse they, them, because if you do that, it's going to open floodgates to something else or other things. That they, them is just one tip of an iceberg, but that if you espouse that, then you're espousing certain things about surgery and about bathrooms and about sports participation. I just don't understand that, and I've been hearing that for 3 years. Barry Weiss, who I respect immensely, actually very gently gave me trouble about it in an interview a few months ago. No, I feel like you could have they and them because it's grammatically and frankly, in terms of courtesy, useful, and that could have nothing to do with all the rest of those things, that the other controversies could take care of themselves. And to be perfectly honest, and this is, a lot of you know there are two me's, linguist me and then contrarian, controversial, stir up the pot me, as if that's what I'm ever doing. But the truth is, a lot of those other things are beginning to resolve themselves. We're having constructive discussions about that need not move they and them away, which is what I kind of thought would happen. I just thought we're going to grapple with those three things, the bathroom, the sports, and the surgery. But in the meantime, hopefully we'll have a gender-neutral pronoun. But I'm told that is naive, and I can't always see outside of my own head.
I think I saw a hand right over here.
Yeah, I was wondering what your thoughts are on the new usage of myself, like Billy and myself went to the store, which is...
I genuinely don't know that it's new. I've never studied it. It doesn't feel new to me. My intuition is that John Adams would have said it. But I have to say that because I don't feel it as new, I don't have an opinion about it, except that it's, I'm going to use a word I like, which is what it is, antimacassar. It's one of these stick your little finger up things, like what you do when you're drinking tea in a certain way. And so instead of Billy and me, Billy and myself, because that sounds more formal, and sometimes you like to put on the dog. But I don't know that it's new. And I'm not telling you it isn't, but I can't feel it. And so.
Sounds new.
Yeah. I should check that out. You're not the first person who's asked me about that. I'll check
But
it out.
on that topic, one would say, I myself.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that goes back to Beowulf, basically. Literally Middle English.
Given that Billy's parents and my parents expected us to be at the library studying, should the fact that Billy and me went to the store be kept a secret between Billy and I?
That was great.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Okay.
The between you and I happens because people are unable to truly internalize this rule about subject and object. And so you just start thinking you're not supposed to say me after and. Next thing you know, you've got between you and I. Although what complicates it is Shakespeare used between you and I. Sometimes I've heard actors kind of spontaneously correct it. But that's because mess begets more mess. And so that's why that sentence happened.
Okay, we're going to take two more questions. We got one here.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for coming to our town, and
Pleasure.
thank you for all the work you do. Your lectures helped me to stay sane during the pandemic.
Oh, good.
And
That's good to know.
I also have a 10 and 13-year-olds, and I'm curious, what do you think of the new slang, the Gen Alpha? Would you compare it to other previous generation slangs as more creative?
Yes, and I'm not sure why that generation is more creative, but I think I forget them the minute I write them. The last piece that I did in the Times was about the new Gen Alpha slang, which I spent the summer listening to. And I was just thinking, they cut this in editing because I thought not enough people would get it. But in this room, I think people will. I said, I'm beginning to feel like Paul Lynde in Bye Bye Birdie complaining about the kids today. You know, I really, I never thought I would get to that point. But what are they all saying? And I was listening to my tweens this summer and thinking, I really don't know what that means. And I have never felt that way about young people's slang. And I've been not young for a long time. There's something about that post-pandemic generation. The new use of the word chat to me is just spectacular. They've taken it from online, where you address a group as chat. And now people are saying, chat, we have to do this a different way. Chat, there's lemonade over on the table. And the first time I heard that, I said, Tom, what did you just say? And he said, it's a chat. And I said, well, what are you chatting about? And then he explained. And so it's the new hey. I had to be told. Chat. And so you say, chat, there's a horse over there. Or literally somebody said, chat, geese. And what they mean is, hey, everybody, look, geese. Chat. It's weird.
First time I heard it, I thought it was Chad. I thought it was a name
exactly,
named
what
Chad.
else would it be?
Yeah. So we have one more question here. I just want to remind folks we have books for sale in the back. And then if you have a book that you've purchased or have with you, you can take form a line right over to Dr. McWhorter's right, where you'll come up onto the stage and get your book signed. So here's our last question.
One of the things that we're having trouble adapting to is the use of initials in chat. Our son communicates with us like he announced he had a girlfriend by saying GF. Sorry, in texting. And it seems like and I constantly looking up what these initials mean. So it seems like that's becoming a new language, and I'm being left behind.
I know how you feel. I think a lot of these acronyms, I think they're doing it as a deliberate sort of creativity and because it gives them a code, and therefore we're not supposed to know. Like, if I may, the AF one, it means as fuck, if I may. And so somebody will say, I'm sleepy, AF, and that's what they use in their text. And the first time I encountered that, I really had to work at it. And then I asked one of my students, I said, what is this AF? And he laughed. Yes, the acronyms really, it's more that Paul Lind feeling. But I think it's almost deliberate. I feel you.
Well, I want to thank our wonderful friends of the library for putting this event together.
Thank you very much.
And of course, we want to thank you, Dr. John McWhorter. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.